What if I told you that something weighing 33 billion tons simply disappeared from NASA's radar directly before our eyes, and no one has any idea where it ended up? Hang in there, because the events that followed will absolutely astonish you. At this exact moment, right now, we find ourselves confronting something that nobody at NASA really anticipated. The interstellar wanderer called Threeey Atlas, the third verified guest from outside our solar system, has performed an action that rattles the core of all we believed we comprehended. If the enigma of Threeey Atlas has you hooked and you're eager for additional brain-twisting cosmic tales, hit that like button hard and signal to the universe that you're tuned in. Each tap supports the ongoing quest for the undiscovered. It didn't gradually fade into the shadows, vanishing softly like so many other entities prior. No, it disappeared utterly, abruptly, and completely immediately following perihelion, that pivotal instant when it approached nearest to our sun. 1 second it was an accurately monitored 33 billion ton Voyager speeding across space. The following, it was absent. No remnant, no indication, no echo, zero. You know, our strongest tools were poised for this occasion. Telescopes were positioned. Information flows were set. This was intended to be the height of observability, when sunlight would cause Threeey Atlas to streak through the evening sky like a signal flare. But instead, astronomers observed the contrary. Vacant expanse, you know. And this is the really disturbing aspect. This wasn't a haphazard vanishing, swallowed by the hum of universal backdrop. It occurred precisely at the instant all anticipated the entity would display its oddest conduct. An instant we had marked on schedules, computed down to the tick. You know, for months, researchers worldwide examined its velocity, its path, its peculiar empty form. They observed as it acted in ways no organic thing ought to. And then, at the zenith of scrutiny, just as its secrets were meant to reveal, it escaped as though it selected that precise time. You know, Threeey Atlas didn't merely bypass us. It evaded our scrutiny. It faded on its own schedule, leaving humanity's finest devices ever created gazing at naught but the quiet emptiness. And that quietness resounds stronger than any transmission we might have anticipated. You know, October 29th, 2025. That marked the date experts had anticipated, the date Threeey Atlas would achieve its nearest pass by the sun, gliding barely within Mars's orbit. This wasn't merely one more milestone on a diagram. This was the trial, the singular instant when each telescope on our planet and farther was fixed, awaiting to observe something remarkable. When a typical comet nears the sun that much, the guidelines are straightforward. The warmth and pull rip it to pieces, dispatching remnants and luminous tails arcing through space like stellar pyrotechnics. We've witnessed it occur innumerable times, but Threeey Atlas ignored those guidelines. As it curved behind the sun, stepping into that short expected eclipse period, experts readied for the entity to resurface on the far side, more radiant, more untamed, perhaps broken, but certainly present, you know, except it failed to. You know, the James Webb Space Telescope examined the precise locations where it ought to emerge. Terrestrial radar setups extended their beams far into the emptiness. The European Space A's monitoring networks focused on barren space. 33 billion tons of material traveling at astounding pace had plainly evaporated. You know, initially experts pondered the evident. Perhaps it had fragmented entirely, turned into a mist of particles too dim to spot. But comets that perish leave traces, spreading rubble mists, particle paths, shard roots, and this instance, zilch, not the slightest gleam. You know, this wasn't an error. This wasn't an oversight. This was altogether different. An occurrence that transpired not in disorder, but in exactitude. Threeey Atlas faded precisely when concealed by the sun's overpowering brilliance. Precisely when the globe couldn't observe, you know, and that explains why this instant torments astronomers. It didn't simply dissolve into the cosmos. It employed the sun as cover, vanishing in the sole interval when we lacked sight. When an innate entity fragments, it deposits a wake, a stellar crumb trail that narrates its demise. We can follow rubble mists for weeks, occasionally months. Particles persist, shards wander. Space doesn't wipe away items that readily. But with Threeey Atlas, there existed nothing. No particle mark, no mist, no shard sparkling dimly in the gloom. The Hubble Space Telescope can identify items tinier than an urban district at vast spans. If Threeey Atlas had broken, even the smallest bits should have appeared in those examinations. Instead, the information returned empty. A crisp, distinct lack where 33 billion tons of material ought to have been traveling at exact foreseeable velocities. Then arose the alternate option. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a misjudgment. Maybe the entity had surfaced from beyond the sun, simply not where anybody anticipated it. But here's the issue with that notion. This path was determined with operative accuracy. For months, various observatories gauged its pace, placement, and speed up to the minutest portions. They considered the tug of each primary entity in the solar system. They incorporated the force of solar rays. They even adjusted for relativistic influences. The mistake range was tinier than a speck of sand in a sea. To misplace it completely would demand a shift so enormous that no innate mechanism could conceivably account for it. This was not an instance of faulty arithmetic. The arithmetic was impeccable, which presents us with something much more alarming. The entity itself altered the narrative. It didn't wander off, it didn't break, it didn't dim. It shifted or rendered itself invisible in a manner nature just doesn't perform independently. And that lone reality has experts murmuring what they seldom voice aloud. Threeey Atlas isn't merely one more comet. It could be something else. There's an instant in each near-solar meeting when the layout of space and illumination forms a sort of universal eclipse, a breach, a spot where from Earth, even our strongest devices can't perceive what's transpiring. Threeey Atlas traversed that breach as if it had anticipated it. You know, as it progressed behind the sun, it accessed the profoundest section of the solar pull. Well, the area where a minor shove can overhaul a whole orbit, and this isn't fantasy, it's an actual and recognized concept termed the Oberth effect. When an item exerts propulsion at its swiftest spot, directly at the base of a gravity well, that minor surge of power becomes an immense path alteration. If Threeey Atlas possessed any kind of drive, even something humble, that lone instant close to the sun would have been the optimal moment to deploy it. A soft push there might have rerouted it toward the distant planets, or into a steady circuit around the sun, or propelled it someplace we haven't considered searching yet, you know. And here's the eerie particular. The vanishing didn't occur haphazardly. It transpired at the sole period when anything exceptional could happen unseen. No telescope could penetrate the dazzling solar shine. No radar could follow its motion over that barrier of warmth and ions. Then when the viewing interval reopened, it was plainly absent. Not reduced in speed, not lessened in brightness, absent. It's nearly as though the entity awaited that unseen area, as if it understood when the world wouldn't observe. You know, for experts who thrive on facts and likelihoods, this isn't merely odd, it's unnerving, because if Threeey Atlas did adjust purposefully in that instant, then what faded beyond the sun might not have been merely a stone. Then arrived October 3rd, an exact flypast of Mars, gliding within 29 million kilometers. That's not merely uncommon, that's probabilistically astounding. A stellar fluke with under 1 probability in 50,000. You know, separately, any of these elements could be dismissed as peculiar yet innate. But when you assemble them, the design starts to murmur something much more disturbing. It appears less like a drifting entity and more like a voyager on an intended course. Go. 3. The Atlas didn't simply show up. It carried out a series, and then at the precise instant when every gaze was skyward, it faded into quietness, like an artist exiting the platform immediately following the concluding performance. You know, when the entity faded, the response from global space organizations echoed a known cadence, a cadence we've encountered previously. NASA issued reserve declarations, selecting every term meticulously, underscoring the necessity for additional facts, additional duration, additional examination. The European Space Agency recognized the spotting void, but clung tightly to the most secure rationale, disintegration. And China, which possessed the optimal vantage from its Mars satellite during the vital interval, uttered nothing whatsoever. This isn't the initial occasion we've observed the quietness amplify beyond the indication. When the inaugural interstellar guest emerged years back, specific radar information and spectral outcomes remained concealed for months. The identical occurred with the subsequent guest, and now with Threeey Atlas, the design constricts once more. Details decelerate, accounts dissolve into restricted pathways. Authorized tones speak gently, if they do. You know, some claim it's administration. Some claim it's prudence. But to numerous in the research circle, it seems like something different. Organizational reluctance confronting the unfamiliar. Not due to scheme, but because admitting what defies the guidelines is frightening. You know, nobody desires to utter the term artificial. Nobody desires to spark worldwide alarm or rampant conjecture. So they delay, they assess, they pause. But in that stillness, something alarming transpires. The lack of responses turns into a response itself, right? And that quietness is more resounding now than before. It extends among observatories, among organizations, among countries. A quietness that implies this vanishing isn't merely another irregularity. It's an inquiry too vast, too perilous, too unclear to respond vocally. Threeey Atlas didn't simply disappear from the heavens. It drew the reality into a darkness nobody appears prepared to enter. I know even following the entity's fade from immediate viewing. Telescopes didn't go mute. They continued monitoring. And in that serene sky, something delicate started to surface. A dim periodic indication concealed in the disturbance. Not a transmission as Hollywood envisions it. No resounding communication, no utterance from the cosmos, just a murmur in the setting, like the resonance of a departing locomotive that nobody observed. You know, astrophysicists at multiple autonomous observatories detected it nearly simultaneously. A gentle recurring variation in the bounced solar rays, scarcely over the detection limit, too consistent to be chance, too organized to dismiss. At first they labeled it a device malfunction, but the design didn't wane. It endured for days, then weeks, shifting among frequency ranges as if pursuing something invisible. You know, openly organizations stated zilch. Confidentially, communications and coded notes started circulating through research groups. A handful of courageous investigators confessed what others feared to articulate. Dot out loud. The indication didn't align with any recognized innate event. Not comet extensions, not breakup particles, not stellar disruption. Something was distinct. You know, this wasn't the sort of indication you encounter routinely. It possessed rhythm, form, and purpose, or at least it seemed so. Some likened it to the renowned WOW indication from the 70s. Others murmured it could be a fresh type of interstellar resonance, a mark deposited deliberately or incidentally, right? And here's the element that elevated every brow in the space. The variation matched flawlessly with the vanishing instant, as if whatever Threeey Atlas really was deposited an imprint in the electromagnetic weave of space. A concluding subtle evidence that disappearing didn't signify departing empty-handed. It signified something remained present, simply tougher to perceive. You know, when murmurs regarding the indication started spreading, the formal replies came predictably. NASA conducted a meticulously prepared session, serenely clarifying that the variation was probably due to lingering solar disruption mixed with device anomalies. Their communication was refined, intentional, and above all, rejecting. The European Space Agency proceeded with its own declaration, almost matching in manner. They referenced standard data inconsistencies, emphasized the value of avoiding hasty judgments, and subtly redirected attention to alternative projects. But what grabbed all focus wasn't their words. It was how impeccably aligned their phrases were. Distinct organizations, distinct lands, but the identical wording nearly verbatim, you know. Then arrived the quietness from China once more. No affirmation, no rejection, just a void that rendered the harmonized clarifications seem even more practiced. Autonomous researchers, though, weren't accepting it. A cluster of radio experts released segments of their unprocessed data to secluded systems, demonstrating that the design didn't correspond to any known disruption mark. It wasn't haphazard, it wasn't clamor, it was something different, you know. And just like that, a subdued conflict of stories commenced. On one flank, the establishments promoting serenity and endurance offering refined clarifications. On the other, an increasing count of experts and watchers murmuring that the reality is being withheld. Not from spite, but from dread. Dread of what admitting that variation might signify. Because if the modulation is genuine, if it really originated from Threeey Atlas, then this wasn't merely a fading entity. It was the exchange, an instant when something beyond might have detected us detecting it. And that concept was something no organization appeared prepared to voice aloud. You know, behind the communal rejections and refined media announcements, something odd started occurring in the shadows. Observatories globally noted abrupt timetable adjustments. Telescope slots reserved months ahead were softly superseded. State research probes reoriented their detectors toward the identical section, dot of barren space where 3 IAs had been observed last. You know, nobody was explaining why, but the design was evident. Someone someplace still thought there was something beyond to monitor. You know, personal observatories started detecting dim bursts of illumination near the initial path. Not intense enough to term a return, but sufficient to keep folks alert at night, executing models repeatedly. These weren't asteroid paths, weren't optical distortions, weren't anything dismissible readily. It was akin to attempting to pursue a shade that declined to remain fixed. You know, what they discovered wasn't a distinct entity. It was a wake, a series of dim irregularities, each one trivial by itself, but collectively shaping a route directing away from the central solar system as if something had altered direction intentionally, not floating like remnants, not dispersing like particles moving. You know, organizations remained mute, but those observing externally started to grasp that what began as an enigma might no longer be a solitary entity. It was now a occurrence expanding outward in manners nobody had readied for. Threeey Atlas may have faded from view, but its essence had only amplified. It was no longer merely an entity. It had transformed into a communication in progress. Hey, don't halt here. The universe brims with enigmas awaiting revelation. Tap on the next video and accompany us as we delve into even more astounding enigmas from the most distant expanses of